Issues, challenges, and areas for cooperation between China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. This is The Heat. Leaders from China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea were supposed to meet this month in Tokyo as part of an annual trilateral summit between the neighboring nations. But with the recent impeachment of South Korean President Park Geun-hye and questions over her ability to attend, the meeting was postponed until 2017. However, all three countries share ongoing concerns over security issues like the DPRK's nuclear plans. Other areas for discussion include cooperation in areas like their economic links and trade. In a moment, we'll be joined by guests from China, Japan, and South Korea, but we begin with Zhao Lingfeng in Beijing. And Lingfeng, China, Japan, and South Korea all share security concerns, such as the DPRK's nuclear tests and also the possible deployment of the THAAD missile system in South Korea. How are these three countries dealing with these controversial issues?
Well, and China's chief negotiator on the DPRK's nuclear program, Wu Dawei, said earlier this month that Beijing is willing to work with the international community to fully implement UN resolution on the issue, but opposes any unilateral sanctions outside that framework. China has suspended coal imports from the DPRK in line with UN sanctions introduced in late November. However, following this, Japan and South Korea decided to carry out their own round of unilateral sanctions, with some moderate penalties already in place. China has pressed for a resumption of six-party talks on the DPRK nuclear issue that's been stalled since 2009. China has consistently opposed the U.S. decision to deploy its THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea. In November, after Japan and South Korea signed an agreement to share defense intelligence, China criticized the move as creating instability on the Korean peninsula with a, quote, Cold War mentality. Chinese daily Global Times said closer military cooperation between Tokyo and Seoul, along with a planned U.S. anti-missile system in South Korea, would severely damage China's geopolitical interests and the national security structure. And
now, these three countries also share other areas that are important, like their economic links and, of course, people-to-people exchanges. What sort of cooperation and progress is being made in these areas?
Well, together, these three countries account for a fifth of the global economy. China is South Korea's biggest trading partner and the second largest to Japan. Turning that around, Japan and South Korea are China's second and third largest trade partners, respectively. So far, the three nations have conducted 10 rounds of negotiations over a trilateral free trade agreement. In a landmark deal, China and South Korea sealed a free trade pact just last year. A more ambitious free trade pact, or the RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, will include these three countries along with ASEAN members Australia, New Zealand, and India. Within this proposed framework, China, Japan, and South Korea will account for 3/4 of the bloc's total GDP. In people-to-people exchange, relaxed visa policies allowed around 5 million Chinese to visit Japan last year. That number doubled compared to 2014. And over 6 million Chinese visited South Korea during the same period. And a recent report showed more than half of all international students in Japan and South Korea come from China. And
thanks, Lingfeng. That's Zhao Lingfeng reporting from Beijing. And joining me now from Beijing is Yang Xiu. He is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Also with us from Hong Kong is Yuichi Shimatsu. He is a journalist and former editor of the Japan Times, and here with me in Washington in the studio is Yonho Kim. He is a senior researcher with the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Welcome to all of you to the show. Yang Xiu, let me start with you. There have been concerns expressed over the nuclear program of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. China, South Korea, and Japan are all opposed to the development and deployment of nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula.
Yep.
We already have sanctions in place, but China also favors dialogue. So what do you see as the best way forward to resolve this issue?
Well, I think we need to conduct two kinds of tools or means. On one hand, we need to push the necessary and the proper pressures on North Korea to let them take the consequences for their irresponsible actions towards the nuclearization. But on the other hand, we need to solve this issue in peaceful manner. So we need negotiation, we need to talk. So all the sanctions, all the other diplomatic measures should be helpful to have a door opening for the dialogues and the negotiations. So that is China's way of thinking, say, on one hand, the pressures, on the other hand, diplomatic efforts towards the negotiation.
So, Yuichi, here we have China, which is part of the sanctions regime, but it also favors dialogue and cooperation in dealing with the DPRK. What is Japan's solution to this problem?
Well, there's been a lot of frustration in Japan, both in the government and in the public, because you have to understand Japan is right on the flight path of these ballistic missile launches, which fly over Japan, pose a real threat if there's an accident or something like that. Plus, the short-range missiles are shot into the Japan Sea, where we have a lot of fishing craft, other ships. So therefore, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he proposed to the South Korean government to form a military alliance. The idea was to step up the pressure on Pyongyang to try to, speed up the peace talks here. But what happened is that, the protests and the impeachment of President Park makes it very unlikely that this alliance is going to go through. So Japan is back to square one. No military alliance, no way to put pressure on Pyongyang. So we're back to where we were.
But is that really an option, Yuichi, a military alliance between Japan and South Korea? Wouldn't that be seen by the DPRK as a provocation, not just the DPRK, but possibly by China and by Russia as well?
Well, absolutely. I think all the neighbors would look at it that way. But the idea was that was how to get some action. If there was some alarm on the other side of the Japan Sea, maybe this will get people back more seriously to the table to try to make more progress. So I don't think it was a real alliance in the sense of leading to a war, but more of a pressure tactic.
Yoon-ho Kim, as Yuichi pointed out, South Korea could be facing new elections. The President Park Hae-hyun, has been impeached. One of the frontrunners to succeed her, Moon Jae-in, said, and I'm quoting, he says that he's willing to have a summit with the DPRK, have direct talks with them. Should the two Koreas be more engaged, do you think?
Well, I think it has become a conventional wisdom in the policy circles, both in Washington and Seoul, that President Obama's so-called strategic patience in dealing with North Korea is a failed approach. So it is time to review all the new options that have not been aggressively pursued. And I think another North-South summit is one option that worth looking at. Indeed, after President Park shut down the Kaesong Industrial Park in the wake of the fourth nuclear test by the North earlier this year, South Korea has been left no meaningful communication channel with the North, and opposition parties have been criticized the Park government for letting the fate of the two nations, two Koreas, at the hands of the neighboring powers. So, so this kind of having another summit meeting is one of the options that would be very attractive to seemingly the next progressive government. But I think we still don't know what price the South Korean government, next government, would have to pay if they're willing to have another summit. Because Kim Jong-un would demand not only reopening the Kaesong Industrial Park, but also resuming Mount Kumgang tourism, right, which doesn't sound feasible under the current UN Security Council resolution.
Right. What about the deployment of THAAD? That's the U.S. anti-missile system which the U.S. wants to deploy in South Korea. Now you have this political uncertainty, the president being impeached, new elections possibly. What's the future of THAAD?
Well, I think one big variable is the final decision to be made by the Constitutional Court.
Right.
If the court uphold the impeachment, it is very likely we're going to have an opposition candidate to be elected at the upcoming presidential election. Both the main opposition, the Minju Party, and the centrist People's Party have been aggressively opposed to the idea of deploying THAAD. The Minju Party argued for a special National Assembly committee to investigate the issue, and the People's Party even supported the idea of having National Assembly approval before we move forward. So if we have progressive government next time, then it is very obvious that the THAAD deployment issue will be under a tough political scrutiny.
Yang-Xiu, what is China's position on THAAD? China's been very critical. What are the major concerns that China has over the deployment of this system?
China-U.S. relation, China-South Korean relation in a very complicated shape that damaged the cooperation among the countries towards the denuclearization. But furthermore, the more important thing for China's concern is the THAAD deployment as an anti-missile system will break the regional strategic stability, and U.S. will make use of the anti-system in Korea, in Japan, to set up an anti-missile war against China and Russia. That is Russia's similar concerns. And as a result, the strategic balance between China and the U.S., Russia and the U.S. Will be imbalanced. So that will trigger a series of regional instabilities. So that is China's basic reason for the opposition, especially under the current sophisticated situation triggered by North Korean nuclear weapons.
Right.
THAAD issue make the situation nowhere towards what we want.
Yuichi, another major contentious issue we have in the region are differences in the South China Sea. What are the challenges that Beijing, Tokyo, and Seoul face in coming to some kind of a deal on this issue?
Well, there's several layers of difficulty. I think there's the UN Law of the Sea panel's decision, which was pretty much unilaterally in favor of the Philippines. And by the way, the head of the panel at the time, or of the Law of Sea sub-organization of the UN, was a veteran Japanese diplomat who's sort of a revisionist on the Constitution. So that hasn't really helped. We've got some imbalance in the law there. The other problem is a steady arms buildup, I think, by all sides, not only Japan, China, and the Philippines, Japan helping the Philippines, but also by Vietnam. So we do see this increasing cluster of weapons and standoff there. Although I think all sides have been, as we get closer and closer to the possibility of a confrontation, all sides are becoming more and more cautious. So, and there has been development toward consultation, and that the commanders of ships are in touch with each other to try to avert problems. But the situation is not going away, and there's not a real clear path now to either a bilateral or a multilateral set of discussions to develop some protocols to prevent an outbreak of hostilities or a skirmish there.
Yang-Xiu, what are some of the ways that China would like to see this dispute resolved? What are the options open here?
I think China's position, basic consideration is the disputes. Now the disputes can be divided into two categories. One category disputes is the different positions between China and the other claimants like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. And regarding to solve these differences, there should be direct negotiations among claimants. And the second category of difference lies in China and the United States, focusing on the freedom of passages. So I think China and the U.S. share the same common interests about freedom of passages, but there are some operational differences. Regarding to this kind of differences, China and the U.S. should have negotiations. So in short, negotiations to address two kinds of differences among different parties. But unfortunately, U.S. now insist on their military actions in this controversial area. So that makes things more complicated, farther from the solution.
Okay, we are going to have to take a break right now. Much more on the issues and challenges facing China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea when we return. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about some of the major issues of joint concern for neighboring nations, China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea. Let's get back to our panel right now. And Yano Kim, let's move on to trade and economic issues. Just last year, China and South Korea signed a free trade pact, and together with Japan and other ASEAN nations, they're also part of a more ambitious pact, the RCEP, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. How crucial is trade towards developing better relations between these countries?
I would say how important it is to the South Korean economy. Actually, the South Korean economy is facing a series of problems, including aging population, years of slow growth, and troubled major industries like shipbuilding, petrochemical, steel making. So expanding free trade is kind of a survival strategy for the South Korean government, for the South Korean economy as a whole. And the bilateral trade with China is, I think, a good example. Thanks to this dramatically growing trade volume with China, we have seen a very new phenomenon in South Korea. For example, the producers of South Korean TV drama, like descendants of Sun Taeang in Korean, they had to factor in the Chinese market when they plan to have this kind of project. So we're seeing a dramatically growing economic interdependence between the two countries.
Right, Yuichi Shimatsu, we have, of course, one big development coming up, and that is the inauguration of Donald Trump as President of the United States. Let's look at some of the comments he's made. Let's look at trade, for instance. This is what the Wall Street Journal had to say. It says that Trump's promised trade tariffs on China would likely hurt U.S. allies Japan and South Korea, which have become increasingly dependent on the Chinese market. How does Japan view Trump?
Well, with a great amount of easiness. You know, Japan agreed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and did a lot to boost it after initial reluctance, and now is left holding the bag. And then following that, the tariff regime, while Trump has focused his verbal rhetoric against Chinese imports in our exports to America, he's also targeted Japan in the past. And the problem for Japan is Japan sells much more expensive goods, let's say automobiles, very high-end electronics, high-end games. So tariffs would really put those items out of the reach of most American consumers. Whereas the Chinese goods, tend to be the things that they sell in Walmart, so you can afford to raise the prices there, maybe 30%, 40%, and people will still buy them. So actually the tariff regime will be very, very hard, I think, on Japan and probably on Korea next, and surprisingly not as hard on China. So this is a very, very difficult issue, and we haven't had really a strong tariff regime except when it comes to dumping recently. So there's not a lot of expertise anymore among economists, trade experts. So this is sort of unknown territory that everyone's going into.
Yang Shu, are you concerned how some of Trump's policies may impact the region? I mean, if we look at his policies on trade, or what he said about what he wants to do, or what he said about Taiwan, is there danger that he might try to insert himself into the region in a way that could undermine the relationship between countries like China, Japan, and South Korea?
There were indeed some positive or optimistic expectation about Trump. because he is a businessman. He should be business likely. However, in recent indicators sent by Trump really worried most of Chinese. But compared with the trade issue and the Taiwan issue, frankly speaking, China doesn't concern too much about the trade disputes because U.S.-China economic ties has been too close to be broken. And especially China doesn't believe Trump will put 45% of the tariffs on Chinese goods. Because that will be serious consequences. Besides China's retaliation trading war between China and the U.S., and also the too high tariffs will trigger high inflation in U.S. economy. That will make a U.S. economy in the worst situation. But in Taiwan issue, that is the core interest. That is really red line for Beijing. So any kind of violating the one China principle will trigger big troubles between China and the U.S. So basically, China is confident about trade because the two sides can make a compromises so that we can get win-win results. But as a Taiwan issue, that's not a trading issue. There's no any small room for Beijing to make a concession. So if Trump insisting on challenging Taiwan issue, one China principle, that would be big, huge political trouble.
If we get back to the trilateral relationship, South Korea has gone through a lot recently, political turmoil, the impeachment of President Park. Now the country will move past this period, but how will it impact this trilateral relationship, the future?
Well, obviously, the South Korea will be in a better position to deal with this trilateral relations after the political turmoil calms down. And I think when we have the next government after the presidential election, we still don't know when it would happen. One of the crucial issues between Japan and Korea is the comfort woman issue. The two countries signed on the agreement a couple of years ago, and the opposition parties have been opposing the agreement and even demanded renegotiation on the agreement. So, and to make it worse, Prime Minister Abe made it clear that the agreement didn't constitute any kind of acknowledgement on the Japanese side of its involvement in sex slavery or wartime crimes. So I think when we have next government in South Korea, that issue will be raised up again. And depending on how we find out the way to solve this problem in a mutually satisfactory way, I think we're going to have kind of another crisis in the diplomatic relations between Japan and Korea.
Yuichi, just a few days from now, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will be visiting Pearl Harbor. He will meet with President Barack Obama. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, for one, has said recently that if Japan wants to reflect on its history, if it wants to offer an apology, there are many places in China where it could do that. Do you think it's also time now for Japan to reconcile its past, its wartime past with China?
Well, Prime Minister Abe is sort of out of step with previous prime ministers and the emperor himself, who voiced regret for the war. When he goes to Pearl Harbor at the end of this month, he doesn't intend to apologize. He's going to merely give remembrance for this attack, even though Japan was clearly, I think no one doubts Japan was the aggressor of a surprise attack. They declared war, but the declaration was delivered very late, and that the sailors who died there were caught off guard. So this is a very problematic visit, and I think it's going to be difficult for President Obama, too, to handle this if there's no apology forthcoming to the families and surviving, the survivors of the more than 2,000 sailors who died there. So I think similar problems in Japan. If unless we have sincere apologies, I think just statements of acknowledgement are simply not going to be enough, and that might actually inflame the situation more. So I think, you know, the Japanese political leadership is divided. The group around Abe insists that Japan waged a just war against Western colonialism, and on the other side you see the emperor and his camp who felt that Japan did horrible things, that the war was wrong, and it should never be repeated again, and apologies are due to the people of Asia and the people of the United States. So there is a definite divide here, and it's unfortunate that President Abe, he's not the first prime minister, and by the way. Prime Minister Yoshida, back after World War II, did go on an unofficial visit to Pearl Harbor, and he did apologize. So this is really a step backward that Prime Minister Abe regrettably is taking.
Yang Xiu, what is your view on this? How much work still needs to be done to heal these wounds? And what kind of a shadow does this put over the relationship between China and Japan?
Well, basically, there have been two long-term problems impede China-Japan relation improvement. One issue is the islands disputes. The other is the historical issue. But for foreseeable future, neither of the issues could be solved between China and Japan. However, the common interests between China and Japan are also obvious. So I think both sides, leaders from both sides will conduct their political wisdoms. On one hand, try to solve this very complicated and sensitive issue, say historical and islands issue. If we cannot solve this issue, at least try to manage, control them. But on the other hand, try to keep and expand economic cooperations. That is the maximum interest for Beijing and for Tokyo.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.